The transfer boat pitches violently against the landing platform. The lighthouse looms over him, an imposing, perfect structure designed to defy the sea. This is Arthur's third lighthouse, and his most isolated assignment. His two assistants, Finn Macready, early 20s, nervous, prone to superstition, and Old Man Hemlock, 60s, a taciturn man who has spent his life on the lakes, help haul the final supplies up the hoist. Old Man Hemlock warns Arthur, his voice gravelly. "She's built right, Keeper, but she's built on death. The reef always asks a price." Arthur dismisses the old man's words as maritime folklore, his mind focused only on the clockwork and the efficiency of the massive rotating lens. The first week is spent establishing a rigid schedule. Arthur believes chaos is born of idleness, and Spectacle Reef, with its massive, complex machinery, demands perfection. He insists on a 24-hour cycle of polishing, oiling, and logging, leaving no moment for solitude or reflection. He inspects the fog signal apparatus in the engine room, a massive automated mechanism that powers the colossal bell striker. The bell itself is housed in a separate, thick-walled annex, its bronze surface gleaming. Arthur checks the solenoid, the hammer's spring-loaded return, and the heavy chain linkage. He logs. Fog signal apparatus calibrated. Striker mechanism tolerances within acceptable limits. Operation of the bell will be entirely mechanical, barring operator error or failure of the steam drive. He locks the bell room with a massive, satisfying clunk, placing the key on a labeled hook in his private office, symbolizing his complete control over the tower's voice. On the third night of Arthur's watch, the weather is perfectly clear, the lake flat and silent. Arthur is in the lantern room, performing the midnight oil trim. The only sounds are the precise tick of the clockwork and the gentle rotation of the lens. Suddenly, from the base of the tower, a sound cuts the stillness, a single, clear, sharp chime of the fog bell. It is unmistakable, a loud, heavy bong that vibrates up the granite core of the tower and resonates in Arthur's teeth. The bell is deactivated, there is no fog, and the key to the bell room is still on its hook downstairs. Arthur freezes, his meticulous calm shattered. He races down the spiral staircase, Finn and Hemlock rushing out of their quarters, pale and wide-eyed. They reach the locked bell room door. Arthur fumbles the key, throws the bolt, and bursts inside. The bell is motionless, the hammer perfectly at rest, the chain slack. Yet the air is still vibrating with the sound. Finn whispers, "It's the reef, Keeper. It's the dead." Arthur, however, forces his logic to assert itself. He spends the next hour meticulously examining every inch of the mechanism, looking for a stressed cable, a dropped tool, or even a large gull impacting the clapper. Anything but the truth. His official log entry is a lie of omission. Midnight check. Possible acoustic resonance observed. No mechanical failure detected. System functioning normally. He does not mention the sound, choosing instead to suppress the event, fearing the implication of either a hostile human presence or, far worse, a breach in the physical laws he lives by. The isolation of the tower suddenly feels less like a sanctuary and more like a heavy granite coffin. If you love stories of the past, the kind that remind us how small inventions shape the world, consider subscribing. We make these videos free so you can fall asleep learning something new about history. Your support helps us keep these quiet stories alive. Now let's get back to the video. A heavy, wet blanket of fog rolls in, signaling the first scheduled use of the bell under Arthur's command. He feels a perverse relief. The legitimate ringing of the bell will mask the unnerving chime he heard previously. The steam drive roars to life, and the heavy striker begins its rhythmic, automated assault on the massive bronze bell. The sound is immense, filling the air with a deep, territorial boom, boom, boom. The lighthouse feels alive, loud, and mechanically secure. After 12 hours, the fog begins to lift. Arthur carefully monitors the conditions and gives the order to shut down the signal. The steam valve is closed, the main gear disengaged. The bell is silent. A minute passes. 5 minutes pass. As Arthur is writing the log entry, fog lifted. Signal ceased. 1400 hours. All clear. The bell rings again. This time, it's not a single chime, but a series of short, frantic, unsteady strikes, faster than the mechanism could ever manage, like a panicked hand beating against the bronze. Clang, clack, clang, clack, clang. Arthur, now enraged, throws down his pen and races to the bell room. The assistants follow, their faces etched with pure terror. They find the door still locked, the chain still slack. But the atmosphere inside is different. Cold, wet, and smelling strongly of lake water, despite the room being sealed tight. Arthur points to the immense bell. Though the hammer is at rest, he notices a slight, almost imperceptible swing in the colossal bell casing, like a great pendulum still settling from a violent, recent motion. The bell's surface, usually dry and polished, is now streaked with what looks like thick, misty condensation. Arthur locks the assistants out and stays inside the bell room alone for 2 hours, running his hands over the cold brass and the inert iron machinery. He refuses to accept a spectral explanation. He focuses on friction, residual vibration, or a minute seismic tremor. He even hypothesizes that a massive air bubble from a submerged wreck could have risen and impacted the tower's base, vibrating the entire structure. But the frantic, distinct sequence of the strikes argues against any random event. It sounded intentional, a desperate call. In his private journal, Arthur starts sketching the mechanism in excruciating detail, trying to locate a flaw that could explain the movement. He notes a minor, superficial scratch on the heavy, spring-loaded return arm of the striker, a fresh mark that was not there before the unscheduled ringing. He cannot fathom how a force external to the machinery could create this precise kind of damage. He begins to suspect one of the assistants is playing a cruel, elaborate trick, trying to sabotage the station and force his transfer. He is forced to monitor them constantly, adding a new layer of tension to the already strained isolation. The tension spills over into the living quarters. Finn, the youngest assistant, is visibly shrinking from fear. He starts barricading his quarters at night, claiming to hear the scratching of fingernails on the stone outside his window. Old Man Hemlock, however, simply grows more sullen and withdrawn, spending hours staring out at the turbulent lake, muttering prayers that Arthur pretends not to hear. The light is working perfectly. The weather reports are clear. But Arthur knows the true danger is not the fog, but the unseen presence that can manipulate his meticulously controlled world. The unscheduled ringing accelerates. It is no longer sporadic. It happens with a terrible, growing consistency, sometimes every night, sometimes 3 times in a single afternoon of clear, dead calm. The rings are always brief, always erratic, and always occur when the room is locked and no one is near the bell annex. Arthur's rigorous schedule begins to break down under the stress of constant, fruitless investigation. He starts a new, private log titled Anomalies. He meticulously records the exact time of each strike, the atmospheric pressure, the temperature inside the room, and the position of the heavy brass pendulum clockwork in the main tower. He begins to see a pattern, but it is a pattern of defiance, not physics. The bell seems to ring most often when he is resting or when he is writing his formal log entry, almost as if it is reading his schedule and mocking his routine. The anomalies grow subtle and deeply personal. Arthur finds small objects in his office have been moved, not dramatically, but shifted just enough to violate his sense of order. His spectacle case moved an inch to the left of the inkwell. The compass on his desk rotated 3 degrees off true north. He dismisses the large events, the ringing, but becomes obsessed with the tiny, controllable details. He starts marking the position of all his personal belongings with tiny pencil lines, confirming the movement. He now believes with grim certainty that a hostile human presence is in the tower, a phantom stowaway who lives in the concealed spaces of the immense structure and feeds on his psychological stability. The assistant, Finn, is now openly terrified. He refuses to enter the lower sections of the tower alone, particularly the storage areas near the cistern, which are always cold and damp. He claims to have seen a faint, blurred reflection of a figure in the highly polished brass of the stair railing, always just behind him. When Arthur sends him to retrieve a wrench from the engine room, Finn returns frantic, claiming the tool wasn't on the rack, but was sitting on the drive belt of the steam engine, dangerously close to being pulled into the mechanism. Arthur finds the wrench precisely where Finn claims, cold and slightly oily. It is an extremely heavy professional-grade tool. Moving it requires deliberate effort. Arthur examines the wrench and notes small, inexplicable indentations on the brass handle. If this was a person, they would have had to enter the bell room, move the items, and somehow evade the lock. Driven by a desperate need for empirical proof, Arthur collects dust samples from the locked bell room doorframe and places tiny, nearly invisible strands of his own dark hair across the doorway to act as tripwires. He makes his official log entry for the day. Increased atmospheric interference noted. Minor shift in personal effects. Inspected bell mechanism. Appears structurally sound. Suspect localized internal pressure anomaly. The final entry in his private log is simple and damning. The hair I set across the door frame is broken. There are no drafts in this fortress. He realizes the entity is operating not just within his vision, but within the very walls of his mechanical world, and it is gaining strength. The tension within the tower becomes unbearable. Arthur has been sleeping in short, armed bursts, convinced that the unseen presence is waiting for him to lower his guard. The bell continues to ring, and the psychological warfare escalates. Finn McCready breaks. It happens during a routine check of the oil reservoir in the main tower. Finn is descending the spiral staircase when he stops, mid-step, and refuses to move. When Arthur pushes him, Finn collapses into a sobbing, hysterical mess. He screams that he cannot stay, that the tower is not a place for the living. He claims that the voices are no longer indistinct whispers or mocking laughter. They are now a continuous, mournful singing that seems to emanate from the very stone, specifically from the deepest foundation beneath the lake's surface. "It's cold, Keeper," Finn sobs. "It's so cold, and it sings of the deep. It sings my name." Finn demands to be taken off the station immediately, threatening to abandon his post and swim the treacherous 17 miles to shore if necessary. Arthur, rational and rigid, cannot allow this. Losing Finn means Hemlock, and he will be forced onto an impossible 8-hour shift schedule, risking complete exhaustion and, potentially, the failure of the light itself. The company rules are absolute. No keeper may abandon his post. Arthur locks Finn in his quarters, citing a psychological emergency in his log, promising the young man that the next supply tender will take him back. But the next tender is weeks away. This act of imprisonment is a crushing admission of lost control. Arthur is no longer the guardian of the light. He is the jailer of a deteriorating mind. Meanwhile, Old Man Hemlock has changed tactics. He doesn't panic. He simply prays ceaselessly and avoids the upper and lower sections of the tower entirely, focusing only on the middle living floors. He tells Arthur, in a chillingly calm voice, "You are a man of the lamp, keeper, but the reef is a place of the water, and the water wants back what it lost." Arthur decides he must stop the bell from ringing itself, not for sanity, but for proof. He obtains a heavy logging chain and carefully wraps it around the clapper and striker arm, immobilizing the mechanism completely. He tightens the chain until the great machine is utterly frozen, incapable of motion, even with the steam engaged. He locks the bell room door, placing 2 heavy lead weights against the bottom of the door frame for good measure. That night, the weather is violently calm. No wind, no wave sound, only the faint mechanical tick of the main clockwork. Arthur sits in his office, his heavy pistol on the desk, waiting. At exactly 300 hours, a sound rips through the stillness. Not the sharp bong of the bell, but a deep metallic snapping noise from the bell annex, followed by a series of weak, frantic thuds against the bronze. Arthur races to the room. The door is locked, the lead weights untouched. When he opens the door, the heavy logging chain he had secured is completely broken. The links are twisted and bent, snapped clean through by an impossible sustained force. The striker arm is straining against its housing, and the bell, though not fully ringing, is vibrating intensely, as if an invisible, immense weight had just slammed into it from the inside. Arthur stares at the snapped chain, the strength required to break it far beyond any force a solitary, superstitious man could exert. It was not a man. It was something else. The snapped chain confirms Arthur's deepest fear. The entity possesses an unnatural, physical power. He dismisses the search for a human stowaway, realizing the entity is intrinsic to the tower itself, a haunting that uses physical force, not spectral illusions. The focus of the haunting shifts dramatically from the bell to the light itself. Arthur is now terrified that the entity will extinguish the only thing that justifies their presence and keeps them safe. While inspecting the main Fresnel lens, he finds small, deliberate acts of sabotage, targeting the lamp. A heavy brass screw, vital for holding the delicate carriage assembly in place, is found lying on the floor, neatly unscrewed. The wick trimming mechanism is subtly jammed with a thin, almost invisible strand of wire. These acts require knowledge of the machinery, precision, and immense spite. Arthur becomes completely withdrawn, trusting no one. He leaves the engine room door wide open, hoping the presence will reveal itself. Old Man Hemlock, observing Arthur's descent, finally approaches him. Hemlock points toward the thick, dense stone wall of the living quarters. The rock remembers the blood, keeper. They built this place fast, too fast. The crib, it wasn't empty when they finished it. Hemlock reveals the local legend surrounding the construction of Spectacle Reef decades prior. how a small, violent storm had sprung up during the most critical phase of crib construction, trapping several workers on the reef. The company, desperate to complete the light, had pressed on, and one young stonecutter, known for his long, dark hair, was supposedly swept off the crib and into the massive hollow stone foundation just as the cement was poured. His body, they say, became part of the foundation, sealed forever in the deepest submerged core. Arthur, the man of logic, initially rejects the story as folk superstition, but the image of the young man, trapped, entombed, and now exerting a terrifying physical force, resonates with the frantic nature of the bells ringing. He realizes the entity is not a ghost walking the floors. It is a mechanical haunting, a presence sealed within the stone itself, using the very physics of the structure to call for help or to express its ancient rage. The bell, the tower's voice, is its only outlet. In a fit of desperate physical action, Arthur bolts shut the main access hatch that leads down to the crib foundation, a hatch rarely opened, leading to the submerged, unused storage chambers. He uses 4 thick steel plates and heavy wrenches, sealing the hatch against any possible ingress or egress, feeling an almost ritualistic sense of finality. That night, the bell rings the loudest yet. It rings a sustained, agonizing, high-pitched scream, a constant clang, clang, clang that threatens to crack the very bronze. Arthur races to the bell room and finds the heavy brass clapper swinging so violently it is impacting the bronze casing far outside its normal arc. The mechanism is still, but the bell is moving, resonating with a sustained internal force. Arthur throws himself against the bell casing, trying to physically stop the vibrations, but the metal is too massive, too energized. He is thrown back by the sheer force of the vibration, leaving him winded and terrified. The bell rings until the energy dissipates, leaving behind only the awful, echoing silence. Arthur has resigned himself to living with the impossible. Finn remains locked in his room, his psychological condition deteriorating. Hemlock attends to his duties like a living automaton, rarely speaking. Arthur now runs the watch almost single-handedly, exhausted but driven by a singular purpose, keeping the light burning, even if the bell is ringing. A massive early winter storm descends upon Spectacle Reef, a churning white hell of wind, snow, and massive freezing waves that crash over the lantern room. The entire tower shakes violently, and the tremendous natural noise of the gale should drown out any minor sounds. Yet the bell rings. It rings not with the erratic thudding of the past, but with a deep, sustained, powerful resonance that seems to align perfectly with the breaking of the largest waves. It is louder, clearer, and more desperate than ever before. Arthur decides he must go to the deepest foundation, to the crib itself, to find the structural source of this impossible energy. He reasons that the massive force of the waves must be vibrating the sealed body in the foundation, and that energy is traveling up the granite core to strike the bell. He unbolts the massive steel-plated hatch he had sealed weeks earlier and descends into the submerged world of the crib. The air down here is foul, smelling of brine, ancient rot, and something metallic. The lowest chamber is mostly filled with black, freezing lake water. Arthur uses his lantern, shining the beam across the cold, wet concrete walls of the inner foundation, the very section of the crib where the stonecutter was allegedly entombed. He finds no structural cracks, no physical sign of stress. But as he shines his light on a section of the wall where the concrete surface is rougher, he notices a subtle, disturbing detail. A patch of the concrete, usually abrasive and cold, feels strangely smooth, almost polished by some internal, repetitive force, and pressed into the damp, cold concrete at a height just above the current waterline is a thin, almost invisible residue. It is dark, silken, and fibrous, looking less like sea debris and more like fine, dark threads that have been worked into the stone by constant, low-frequency rubbing. Arthur's blood runs cold. He realizes the ghost is not merely vibrating the tower. It is moving within the concrete, slowly, over time, seeking release and rubbing its essence against the stone. He reaches out a trembling hand and touches at the polished concrete. It is unnaturally smooth, and a fine, damp strand sticks to his finger. It is not cotton or hemp. It is dark, fine, and long. He immediately retreats, scrambling back up the vertical ladder, slamming the hatch shut and bolting it even more fiercely than before. He cannot look at the fine strand on his finger, knowing what he suspects it is. He throws it into the coal furnace without looking, desperate to eliminate the evidence, but the feeling of the silken threads against his skin lingers like a physical branding. Shaken but invigorated by a terrifying purpose, Arthur begins a feverish search of the tower's oldest records, hunting for any official or unofficial mention of a construction accident. He is no longer seeking mechanical failures. He is seeking historical proof of the entity he is battling. He eventually finds a forgotten box of old, water-stained construction manifests and log snippets dating back to the 1870s when the tower was built. Buried within the documents, he finds a handwritten, unauthorized note from a former site foreman complaining about a missing worker during a sudden squall in the summer of 1876. The note is brief and brutal. August 16th, 1876. Lost Emil during the squall. Swept off the upper crib as the cement mix hardened. Could not retrieve him. The iron workers insisted they heard him screaming down the ventilation shaft, even after the crew sealed the primary block. The company must be notified privately. He was a good man, with hair down to his shoulders. Must ensure this is not recorded in the main ledger. Cost overruns are unacceptable. Arthur reads the note, his hands shaking. Emil, a man with hair down to his shoulders, entombed in the foundation of the very tower he is sworn to keep. The puzzle pieces snap into place. The voice in the stone, the scraping sounds, the physical force, the fine fibers he felt in the crib, and the bell, the voice of the tower, ringing his scream. Arthur now understands the precise nature of the haunting. Emil is not an angry ghost. He is a trapped, sealed man using the energy of the lake and the precise physics of the tower to call for help. The bell rings itself because it is the most resonant part of the tower, acting as a megaphone for the entombed man's frantic, unending attempt to escape. The mechanical sabotages were not attacks. They were attempts to force Arthur to notice, to break the machine so he would look deeper. The realization is both horrific and a profound relief. Arthur's rationality is salvaged. He is not mad, but he is trapped with a terrifying, concrete-encased tragedy. He descends to the main engine room, where the massive steam piston drives the compressor for the old, now unused, steam siren. The siren is deactivated, but its connection to the foundation is immense. Arthur notices that the heavy steel anchor plates securing the siren assembly to the granite base are vibrating slightly, even in the calm weather. A subtle, constant tremor he had missed before. He carefully places his own ear against the cold, granite wall near the access to the crib hatch. He doesn't hear singing or screaming. He hears a low, constant grinding scrape, like fingernails or steel being dragged repeatedly against solid stone. It is the sound of a prisoner fighting their sentence, trying to scratch their way through the massive block of limestone. Arthur knows, with absolute clarity, that this noise travels up the entire core of the tower, and when it meets the sensitive bronze of the bell, it becomes a single, mournful chime. Chapter 8. The Examination. Word count, 615. Time, days, 41, 43. The final mechanical investigation. Arthur has a fixed, terrifying objective: to prove his findings by examining the specific area of the bell mechanism that is ringing itself. Persistent ringing, always sporadic and brief, must be caused by a constant friction point, energized by the foundation's scraping. He focuses on the spring tension assembly, the massive, coiled springs that absorb the recoil of the heavy clapper and ensure it returns to a neutral position, ready for the next automated strike. He theorizes that the entity, using the tower's resonant frequency, is causing the springs to subtly vibrate and extend, pulling the striker a fraction of an inch and letting it slap against the bronze. Working alone, he first releases Finn, who is now docile and terrified. Arthur simply gives him a book and tells him to wait, leaving him unharmed but mentally broken. Old Man Hemlock watches with detached sorrow. Arthur then attempts the most dangerous mechanical operation, stopping the giant, weighted clapper assembly mid-swing. Using a system of heavy pulleys and custom-fitted wooden blocks, he manages to lock the clapper in place, creating enough slack in the tension springs to allow close inspection. He takes his strongest lantern and holds it close to the tightly wound steel coils. The springs, each as thick as a man's arm, are covered in a fine layer of dust and oil. But deep within the tightly coiled center, he sees it, the residue. It is dark, thick, and looks like a wad of dried matted fibers caught deep within the spring mechanism, binding the steel coils and acting as an organic friction point. This matted mass is catching the subtle energy traveling up the tower and using it to release the striker. Arthur uses a pair of long, clean medical forceps from the infirmary kit to slowly, painstakingly extract a piece of the fibrous matter. It is black, slightly damp, and surprisingly resilient. It is certainly not hemp, rope, or machine grease. He recognizes the texture. It's fine, dark, and long, consistent with the note he found. It is human hair, twisted and matted with mineral deposits and years of rust and grease. A massive, solidified clump of Emil's hair has somehow been forced into the bell's mechanism, turning the fog signal into a macabre, unintended extension of the man's entombed body. The sight of the physical evidence, the undeniable human trace in the immaculate machine, sends a wave of profound nausea through Arthur. He drops the forceps, unable to look at the hair, unable to touch it. He immediately locks the bell room, leaving the clapper suspended, the spring still open, the gruesome evidence of the tragedy hanging in the air. He realizes the entity didn't intentionally place the hair. The hair was there as a result of the immense, constant vibration of the bell's operation over years, slowly working the fibers of the dead man's body up the core and into the mechanism. The bell had been ringing itself for years, perhaps decades, before he even arrived. Arthur spends the next day in a state of hyper-alert exhaustion. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't eat. He monitors the light and the storm. He has the physical proof, but he knows reporting it will result in his immediate commitment to an asylum. He is a man caught between an unyielding tragic reality and the rigid dictates of his profession. He releases Old Man Hemlock, commanding him to take care of Finn. Hemlock, seeing the dark intensity in Arthur's eyes, simply nods and accepts the order. Arthur then performs a complete structural inspection of the light, ensuring the lens is clean, the oil is topped off, and the clockwork is working perfectly. The light, the only true purpose of the tower, must remain flawless. He walks to the bell room where the clapper hangs suspended, revealing the matted hair in the springs. He looks at it, no longer with fear, but with a desolate, quiet resignation. He knows he can't remove it. It's too deep, too tangled, and he cannot bring himself to touch the human remains. He removes the wooden blocks he used to suspend the clapper, letting the massive iron weight return to its neutral position. The springs snap back, instantly covering and concealing the dark, fibrous mass. The bell mechanism looks clean, whole, and completely operational again. The secret is sealed once more within the machine. Arthur returns to his private office and writes the final, agonizing log entry in his official keeper's journal. He writes only of the facts that can be rationally observed. February the 2nd, 1888. A period of extended stress and mechanical fluctuation has required emergency action. Due to severe maintenance challenges and the onset of an unmanageable psychological crisis affecting my assistant, Finn Macready, I have been left without necessary support for the required duties of the station. This level of isolated duty, combined with recent structural vibrations, is deemed unsustainable. I have initiated the emergency relief protocol. He then takes his personal journal, the one detailing the ringing, the movements, and the discovery of Emil's identity and subsequent findings. He writes his true confession on the last page. The fault is not in the gear, but in the granite. The man's name was Emil. He is sealed within the heart of this rock, and the bronze bell is the only way he can speak. The hair, a physical remnant, has fused with the recoil springs, turning his tomb into a constant, terrible signal. I have seen the impossible, and I have chosen to save the light over my own sanity. I have left the evidence where only a meticulous, mechanical mind will find it, deep within the springs. I am leaving this watch, not because of madness, but because of truth. I have heard the rock's voice, and it is a human scream. He finds the emergency signal flare, a rare, custom-made yellow light. He ascends to the lantern room, the light casting its strong, steady beam into the clear night. He fires the yellow flare. The light streaks across the black sky, a desperate appeal for rescue, for an end to his isolated truth. He then waits in the lantern room, the tick of the clockwork mechanism soothing in its perfect rhythm. The bell is silent. It has done its work. The relief cutter arrives 2 days later. Among the crew are 2 armed guards to deal with the perceived psychological emergency, and 2 senior lighthouse engineers, Mr. Wallace and Mr. Graves, who arrived to investigate Arthur's vague report of structural vibrations. They find Arthur in the lantern room, clean, quiet, and completely lucid, but with eyes that look right through them. He simply hands Mr. Wallace the key to the bell room and points to his official log. The light is perfect, he says. The fault is in the bell mechanism. It needs the attention of an engineer, not a doctor. Arthur is quickly and efficiently transferred off the rock, leaving behind Finn and Hemlock to follow later. Wallace and Graves immediately descend to the bell room, intrigued by Arthur's composure and the lack of explanation in the log. They find the mechanism sealed and locked. Graves, the elder engineer, notices the faint scratch on the striker arm Arthur had noted weeks ago. They run a diagnostics test. The bell rings a perfect, automated sequence. They deactivate the steam drive. Silence. They wait. Suddenly, the bell emits a single, high-pitched thwack, a sound that is both mechanical and intensely unnerving. Vibration, Wallace mutters, checking the wind gauges, which are still registering a dead calm. Graves, meticulous and precise, orders the clapper to be safely suspended, replicating the position Arthur had placed it in. When the clapper is held up, the recoil springs are fully exposed. Graves shines his high-intensity lamp deep into the coil. The two engineers exchange a look of profound disbelief, then horror. Deep within the tight, compressed coil of the spring is a dense, black, matted wad of human hair, fused with the iron. It has compressed and hardened over time, creating a physical bridge and friction point. When the tower vibrates, even minutely from internal temperature shifts or distant waves, the compressed hair expands and contracts just enough to pull the spring and slap the striker against the bell's lip. It is a perfect, grotesque mechanical circuit. "My God," whispers Wallace, the engineer. "It's organic. It's what was causing the friction." The poor man wasn't mad. He was right. Something was making this bell ring. Graves, the senior engineer, remains silent, his face pale and set. He looks from the mechanism to the thick granite walls of the fortress, built to withstand anything. He knows the sheer force and constant energy required to push that much hair into a spring of that tension is an impossibility. He knows the hair must have been working its way up the core, an unseen physical extrusion of a buried trauma. They remove the hair meticulously, sealing it in a company envelope for official documentation, their mechanical world shattered by this singular, impossible event. They leave the official log with a terse addition. Bell mechanism spring assembly, compromised by unidentified organic material. Matter removed, mechanism repaired. Arthur, sitting on the deck of the cutter, watches the light of Spectacle Reef recede. He knows the bell will never ring itself again. The physical voice of Emile has finally been silenced by the cold hands of two rational men. But Arthur knows the man is still there, trapped in the stone. He runs his hand over his close-cropped hair, a small, knowing smile on his face. He is free, and the truth of Spectacle Reef is sealed within his journal, and within the silent granite heart of the reef itself.